Welcome to Rad2, another daily reader for Reddit. Like and subscribe for daily Reddit videos. Have a question about the 2019 novel coronavirus 2019 nCoV? Ask us here. On Thursday, January 30th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared that the new coronavirus epidemic now constitutes a public health emergency of international concern. A majority of cases are affecting people in Hubei province, China, but additional cases have been reported in at least 24 other countries. This new coronavirus is currently called the 2019 novel coronavirus, or 2019 nCoV. The moderators of askscience have assembled a list of frequently asked questions, including: how does 2019 nCoV spread? What are the symptoms? What are known risk and prevention factors? How effective are masks at preventing the spread of 2019 nCoV? What treatment exists? What role might pets and other animals play in the outbreak? What can I do to help prevent the spread of 2019 nCoV if I am sick? What sort of misinformation is being spread about 2019 nCoV? Our experts will be on hand to answer your questions below. We also have an earlier mega thread with additional information. Note: we cannot give medical advice. All requests for or offerings of personal medical advice will be removed, as they're against the askscience rules. For more information, please see this post. How does this compare to previous viral outbreaks like SARS, Zika and Ebola? I don't remember entire cities or regions being evacuated of foreigners, or cities walling themselves off with other outbreaks. Is this a bigger deal than previous outbreaks? It's most comparable to SARS, which was another coronavirus. Currently, it's less deadly than SARS but more contagious. It also seems to be pretty stable in humans, meaning not a lot of mutation has been observed. So hopefully it won't mutate into something more lethal. Zika doesn't spread person to person, so it's not really comparable. Edit: Zika can spread person to person through sex, but it's mainly through mosquitoes. Ebola is not very contagious but can be very deadly. I think it's still too early even for statements such as it's less deadly than SARS. The CDC seems to feel the same way. The complete clinical picture with regard to 2019 nCoV is still not fully clear. Reported illnesses have ranged from infected people with little to no symptoms to people being severely ill and dying. In the case of SARS, a couple of people fairly early on in the disease went to Hong Kong, from whence it spread to Toronto among other places, spreading the disease where it was basically previously unknown, yet reporting on cases and fatalities was accurate. In contrast, this outbreak started at least as early as December in Wuhan, and there is skepticism about the reliability of numbers. There are multiple points of uncertainty. Have all infected patients been recognized? Have all fatalities been tabulated? How long does it take to die from the disease? This last point may sound crass, but it is actually important. If there are 11,000 ill, and yesterday 8,000, then 3,000 were diagnosed only one day ago, you can't simply divide 250 dead, 11,000 infected, and get a fatality rate. There was similar uncertainty during the SARS epidemic. On the basis of more detailed and complete data, and more reliable methods, WHO now estimates that the case fatality ratio of SARS ranges from 0% to 50% depending on the age group affected, with an overall estimate of case fatality of 14% to 15%. It's also notable that the fatality rate may depend on many factors. A couple of major ones are demographics, age, general state of health, appropriate and timely treatment. Wait, so if coronavirus is the scientific term, why hasn't it got a name to plaster on the breaking news scroll bar? The name the public health community has given it is 2019 nCoV, meaning 2019 novel coronavirus. That doesn't roll of the tongue as nicely as coronavirus, or SARS, I guess. SARS was severe acute respiratory syndrome, which is equally vague and could really be used to describe 2019 nCoV. Many novel viruses are named after where they're first detected. Perhaps we should start calling it a Wuhan coronavirus. It is now generally frowned upon to name bad things after specific regions or cultures. It can leave an unfair mark of unknown magnitude on those proper nouns. The Spanish flu, which killed a significant portion of humans, was only named such because they were the only ones not censoring news. As such, most scientists really try to stick with 2019 nCoV. Edit: Pursuit Suits points how the actual 2015 WHO best practices for naming new human infectious Diseases. The best practices state that a disease name should consist of generic descriptive terms based on the symptoms that the disease causes and more specific descriptive terms when robust. Information is available on how the disease manifests, who it affects, its severity or seasonality. If the pathogen that causes the disease is known, it should be part of the disease name. Terms that should be avoided in disease names include geographic locations, e.g. Middle East respiratory syndrome, Spanish flu, Rift Valley fever, people's names, e.g. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, Chagas disease, species of animal or food, e.g. swine flu, bird flu, monkeypox. Cultural, population, industry or occupational references, e.g. legionnaires, and terms that incite undue fear, e.g. unknown, fatal, epidemic. What are the chances of contracting the virus in a major city outside China? The media is doing its thing and generating a lot of fear. I'd like to know whether most people here need to actually be worried about contracting the virus. Very unlikely in a developed country. Quarantine procedures are very effective and people who may have been affected are contacted or notified to watch their health. If you're in developing country, it's difficult to tell, but your chance of contracting the virus is much higher because the people who already have the virus have likely not be isolated, thus you may get it from them. Overall, your chance of contracting corona is quite low. Just take safety precautions such as staying away from people who seem sick. Sanitize your hands and eating surfaces. Is it true that this is very contagious? I am reading that the virus size is large and droplets in the air fall to the ground or surfaces quickly, so it's not as contagious as if the virus were smaller and would stay in the air longer. Are people correct in saying this is very contagious? What is correct? The virus has a larger shedding period in an infected individual relative to your basic common cold viruses. That means that a person infected is able to infect other people over a longer period of time. There is currently belief that someone infected with the present coronavirus is shedding the virus even before he starts having symptoms, as you can imagine. That makes the virus a lot more contagious because someone may not know they are at risk of infecting someone else. I read recently it has an infection rate of something like 2.6, which is very contagious on the scale. What is the scale exactly? The scale is actually the row naught number. It estimates the number of additional people an infected person will infect. It's an epidemiology tool. The flu has an row of about 1.5, I believe, so this is a bit higher. But for reference, measles has an row in the teens. I think it's around 15 to 18. Also keep in mind this is purely a predictive tool. It doesn't mean every person with coronavirus will infect 3 more. And here are many epidemiological scenarios that can play out with the same row. Can someone help me understand how the flu can have a row over 1? If each person that gets it passes it to 1.5 people, how does that not guarantee that everyone gets it? Won't those 1.5 people spread it to 2.25 people and so on? R0 assumes no intervention and a naive population. A naive population isn't an unlimited resource. Eventually it transmits to people who have already had it who can't get sick, or runs through everyone in a pool. R0 also assumes you do nothing. You can't use it the way most of Reddit has decided you can lately. E.g. HIV has an R0 of 4 or so. But at least in the West, people with HIV do significantly more than nothing. Few will transmit to 4 people. Many won't transmit to anyone. The risk is fairly easily managed. R0 makes no statement on how difficult it is to control the spread, only on how much you need to reduce it to stop the spread. E.g. measles is the gold standard for airborne contagion, with an R0 of 12 to 18. But it's still really easy to control today, by getting vaccinated. What's the deal with that paper finding HIV genes in the coronavirus? Assuming that the results of that paper are true, does that make it harder to fight? Does it make it easier to spread? Does it make it more lethal? It is definitely not the case. The authors of the paper typed in the amino acid sequence insertions into a search engine that finds other similar sequences, but with short sequences like those they typed in. Seriously, 6 amino acids in length. What a joke. You're going to get a lot of results. They cherry-picked HIV out of the list for no scientific reason. Try it yourself. Here's the link. Just type your amino acid sequence of interest in. You'll find a lot of results. and a lot of noise. Glass ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. It is a travesty that paper has been promoted and shared by someone with a very large audience and no virology expertise, fueling the fire of conspiracy theorists. Also, for what it's worth, it, like anything uploaded to bArchive, was not peer-reviewed. Edit. PS. Thanks for the gold. Don't know if I'm too late for this talk. My question is whether there is a possibility for this strain to become seasonal like the flu. What makes the flu, with all of its types, not simply die off with a quarantine like how it happens with SARS? The other reply seems to have misunderstood your question. I would say that we do not know if this strain, if it becomes pandemic, will eventually die off. A few of the viruses that cause the common cold every year are also coronaviruses. So it is possible the flu does not die off every year because it continues to spread at lower levels to the tropics, and then the opposite hemisphere, undergoing assortment with other flu viruses and evolving all the time. Coronaviruses are known to recombine, exchange pieces of their DNA, with other viruses and evolve all the time. There's a lot of conflicting information about asymptomatic carriers and the latency in presentation of symptoms. What do we know about these two subjects? Do the carriers present with viral shedding for the same duration as a symptomatic infection? What is the average latency in confirmed cases? Very good questions. Singapore may be able to help provide some answers soon. Singapore currently has 13 infections, all of them mainland Chinese tourists who are being kept in isolation in 2 Singapore hospitals. All of them mingled to a greater or lesser extent with the local population before being admitted. 139 close contacts have been identified and 134 of those have already been traced and are being monitored. It is still the incubation period, but so far no locals have been reported as being infected. The next 2 weeks will be very instructive as it will show how widely this group infected others in a country they were visiting. From that we will get better idea of the virus's potential. Fortunately, Singapore has the expertise and infrastructure to get a good handle on this and provide reliable data. Update. There are now 18 cases in Singapore. 17 are mainland Chinese tourists who traveled from Wuhan. The other is a Singaporean who traveled back from Wuhan on the recent evacuation flight. There are still no reported local transmissions. 2 resources from the Singapore Ministry of Health are linked below. The first is an update on the individual reported cases in Singapore for anyone who wants to keep abreast of what's happening there. The second is a more general site which contains information on the virus and its effects and is updated regularly for anybody who wishes to understand and keep abreast of what's happening from a well-informed source. Link to Singapore Ministry of Health press releases concerning each of the individual cases. www.mo.gov.sg. Link to Singapore Ministry of Health updates and general information about the virus. www.mo.gov.sg. Update the 4th of February 2020. Singapore now has 4 locally transmitted infections. All 4 can be traced back to people who traveled to or came from Wuhan. www.channelnewsasia.com. Just wanted to point people towards this excellent New York Times article from today which has some very accurate graphics for understanding this outbreak. How can you tell the difference between being a bit ill, sick and having the coronavirus? Are there any obvious signs that separate it from traditional flu? Are there any obvious signs that separate it from traditional flu? Yes, actually. The majority of cases so far have resulted in a fever followed by a cough followed by shortness of breath, but rarely sniffles or sneezing. If your symptoms are predominantly a stuffed nose and sneezing, which are typically the first symptoms of a cold or flu, then you likely don't have the coronavirus. None of the 99 patients from the original study of hospitalized patients had a runny nose or sneezing as their first symptom. Most of them didn't have it at all. Early estimates have given the death rate of the coronavirus 2%. The death rate for the flu is about 0.1%, so about 20 times more deadly than the flu if I did my math right. Thanks for the sources. I am personally skeptical about a final fatality rate for coronavirus of 2% because, and the source does admit this, it is an early estimate and the first to contract viral diseases are generally already immunocompromised in some way, elderly, very young, or have some pre-existing condition, which in turn makes them more likely to die of the disease as well. There are various factors that cause that fatality rate to be inaccurate. For example, how many more people are infected and show minimal symptoms and recover without ever being recorded? This is one factor that can cause the current estimate of 2% to be higher than the real rate. But also consider that the 2% estimated currently is based on deaths infected. If you only look at the confirmed cases of deaths and infections, then for the fatality rate to remain at 2%, all of the current infected must recover fully and not die. That is highly unlikely. Another way to look at fatality is deaths recovered, which is at around 50% right now. But a 50% fatality rate is also extremely inaccurate because of the small sample size and various factors that can influence early deaths. More time and data is needed before fatality rate can be determined. For example, SARS was initially thought to have a 3 to 4% mortality rate, which was then revised to be much higher later on, around 9 to 12%, I believe. I'm curious, how did they actually first discover this virus? For example, an infected patient goes to the doctor with symptoms of pneumonia. Won't the patient be normally treated as just another infection? Why would they test the patient for the kind of virus that is causing the infection? They actually published an article on this. I'm doing this from memory. I just read the article this morning, so I don't have the names right, but after SARS, the Chinese Public Health Agency set up surveillance for pneumonia of unknown etiology. Essentially, healthcare providers are required to report pneumonia with or without a fever that doesn't go away after the use of typical antibacterial, antiviral medicines, and for which there was no lab diagnosis using standard tests. For each of these, they did a bunch of interviews and collected a bunch of samples. You can usually get a sense of the cause of a pneumonia based on what a chest X-ray looks like if you have some other clinical context. So they were pretty sure it was viral. Since the area of China is rife with bat coronaviruses, they went looking for a coronavirus and found it www.nejm.org. I'm just wondering what will be done for people who have the virus. Is it possible that with proper medical care, the organism can get through it on its own? No cure exists yet and a possible vaccine is probably months away. So what will happen to them? Will they remain sick until such a vaccine exists or until they die? A vaccine may not be months away. SARS struck in 2003 and still doesn't have a vaccine. Thanks for watching Rad2. Like and subscribe for daily Reddit videos. If you like these videos, check out the original Rad channel.